I'm John Lanius. Welcome to The Room. The Room gives you access to Geniecast top thought leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, business coaches, sports celebrities, and much more. Our guests will share ideas and concepts that you may use to better your organization and propel your teams. Our guest today is Dr. Marc Milstein. Dr. Mark Milstein is an internationally recognized speaker on optimizing brain health, lowering the risk of dementia, and boosting happiness and productivity. From the moment Dr. Milstein steps on stage or presents virtually, he engages audiences with breakthrough research and valuable take-home tips. Dr. Milstein, welcome to The Room.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I'm super excited about this topic because I love everything about the brain. And given it's our most complex organ in our body, we could probably take this conversation in a myriad of directions. But what I'm curious about for people who don't study the brain as deeply as you have or have an interest in it, what should we know about your background specific to this conversation and the brain?
Well, I actually started out in cancer research. And what happened was I was part of a team of scientists that was studying breast cancer. And the team discovered that something involved in breast cancer, a protein involved in breast cancer, was also involved in memory. And so this was actually at the time a really interesting insight that what's happening in our body that can seem unrelated, a protein involved in breast cancer also is involved in learning and memory. And this was around the time that our insights into brain health and understanding the brain were just essentially exploding. And what really is helpful to understand is that we can optimize our brain health, but also by optimizing other aspects of our health, things that are happening from the neck down, we also improve our brain health, our productivity, our ability to focus. So really that got me very interested in how we can take these insights. How do we take the latest research, apply it so that we can get the most out of our brain? And we've learned so much in the last few years about this, where we have these actionable tips to improve our brain health and improve our overall health, which improves our brain.
So I really appreciate that you mentioned memory, because if we look at the brain and we look at the limbic system and how, the limbic system and memory is related to fragrance, one of the things in my background is I've studied world fragrance or world incense traditions for over 40 years. And it's interesting to me how memory affects our brain, our overall general health. So go a little deeper in talking about smell and its connection to memory and also optimizing brain health.
Yeah, that's a great one. So our senses, our sense memory is one of our strongest forms of memory. And so you might have this experience. I can tell you a little example of this is my grandparents had a certain type of soap that they always used in their house. And to this day, if I smell that soap, I am transported back to all these great memories of my grandparents. And, we might have that with a recipe or a food that we smell walking by a restaurant. And it's just really how our brain developed, our ability to smell things and remember our survival. If you think about it, our survival depended with our ancestors on our ability to recognize smells that could be dangerous, could be food. And so it's deeply embedded in our brain now to be one of our strongest parts of memory. And this really does apply to all the senses. So really taking a moment and thinking about what we're seeing, what we're hearing. And one of the tips that I always talk about when in terms of improving your memory is that if we think that, I'm just going to remember, I'm just going to remember, that's it. My brain's just a video camera and I'm going to take in information. I'm just going to remember, that'll be fine. That's where we tend to go awry. Instead, if we just take an extra moment or two and we say, you know what, I'm going to attach this to a sense. I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to build a mental picture. I'm going to close my eyes and visualize what I have to remember, where I parked my car, where I put my keys, that person's name. Or I'm going to take a moment and attach it to a sound or a smell. It sounds a little weird, and at first people say, that seems like a little bit of extra work. But building out the story, tapping into the senses is a little small thing that really helps memory stick. It taps into how our brain works. And with a little bit of practice, people are really surprised how much more they start to remember by delving into these aspects of our brain.
When you were sharing about the memory of your grandparents' soap, I was thinking about Helen Keller, and she said later on in life that the smell of oranges would transport her 40 years into the past. And I think that's very interesting. So you mentioned your grandparents, you talked about, memory. So how does memory relate to dementia? And what are some things we can do at any age that we can lower our risk for dementia?
Yeah, so what we're learning is that we can lower our risk for dementia anywhere from 30 to 60% based upon lifestyle factors. Dementia is not as much of a genetic factor as we thought. Genes can play a role. We inherit genes that can raise or lower the risk, but in 95 to 99% of all cases, what we do in terms of our lifestyle, our day-to-day habits has a profound impact on the health of our brain today, tomorrow, and years down the road. And so what we're learning is things like optimizing our sleep, our stress, some foods that we should include and things we should probably minimize, some underlying conditions that are surprisingly common, but often overlooked that drive dementia. And so we see these factors, about 10 of them, that we clearly see if we can essentially address them, manage them, treat them with little things each day, we can significantly bring down that risk of dementia. So just to clarify, dementia is memory loss, having trouble making decisions, having trouble focusing. It's not a disease. Alzheimer's is one disease that causes the symptoms of dementia. There's many causes of dementia, but we see clearly that there's things we can do to bring that risk back down for both Alzheimer's and dementia. So we have so much more hope now. We feel so much more empowered that we can impart this information and really have people feel like they have more of a sense of control over these issues.
Yeah, I would definitely say that dementia causes fear in people because there's this whole idea that if we don't remember who we are, we don't know who we are. And that can be very powerful. So you mentioned sleep, you mentioned diet a little bit. And, when I look at my own studies of the brain, you'll hear on one side of the fence people saying, oh, you only need 4 hours of sleep a night and you can really be powerful. And then other people will say, more than 8. Let's just talk about sleep for a minute. What in your findings or in your research, what is the most optimal amount of time for sleep?
Well, I'll tell you one thing really quickly, because it's probably one of the most striking insights into why sleep is important, because we do hear this still that, oh, I don't need sleep, or sleep is for the weak. We'll sleep later. But just to put in perspective, when you go to bed at night, tonight, your brain is going to shrink down to about 65% of its current size. And what's happening is your brain, I know that sounds like a horror movie, but your brain is actually squeezing out toxins, trash, and waste. Imagine like a sponge. So just living day to day, our brain fills up with garbage and waste, just like your house does. You have to clean it out. When you sleep, you squeeze out the trash, and fluid comes up from your spinal cord and washes all that waste and garbage away. So at its essence, if we're not getting enough sleep, we're causing a buildup of waste and toxins and trash in our brain. And that really is one of the most powerful insights into why sleep is so important. We need many of what we call these sleep cycles to keep squeezing and washing our brain away. For most people, it's somewhere between 7 and 9 hours a night. There are definitely some people who can get away with less, but that's based upon some genetics. It's very rare. And you really want to make sure that you're one of those people that you're passing every cognitive, every physical test, and you're still fine with less than 7. Past 9, we're concerned that can be too much. So somewhere between 7 and 9 is what we see as an optimal amount of sleep for the vast majority of people to really, for many areas of our brain health, but also getting that wash and that rinse and that squeezing out the waste every night.
So this is the first time that I've ever heard that our brain actually shrinks when we sleep. And yes, it is kind of like a horror movie. But, that kind of begs the question, should we be drinking lots of water before we go to sleep? Like what are some best practices to make sure that really keeps us fresh throughout our life?
Yeah, that's a great point. So hydration is important. We don't want to overhydrate because then we don't want to be waking up throughout the night to go to the bathroom and disrupt this process. There's nothing wrong with waking up throughout the night, I should say. That's actually one of the most important insights that we have, is that we actually do wake up every 90 minutes. Where we run into trouble is that we wake up and we either can't get back to sleep because we're worried, we're stressed out. That's where mindfulness does play a role, which I know we'll be talking about. But the idea is that hydrating throughout the day, so that we think about even starting early in the morning, first thing when we get up, spacing out our hydration, not just trying to do it all before bed so that we're not causing too many wake-ups throughout the night. Best practices are really trying to prioritize some darkness in our room, staying away from all those devices that emit a lot of light, making sure we're sleeping in some darkness and that it's real darkness. It's not modern darkness. You can look around your bedroom tonight and you might have a lot of glowing things. Try to unplug some of those. We want to give our brain the opportunity to really go through this washing cycle and give it the time to do it. We need several of these rinse and wash cycles throughout the night. So we really want to give ourselves that ample opportunity and make sleep a priority.
Great info. Love it so far. All right. So before the break, briefly, there's been some talk about, COVID and brain health and the impact. We know that it impacts smell. So what are you discovering about COVID and its impact on brain health?
Yeah, this is an emerging, very important area. So we are seeing data that's come out in the last few weeks that about 30% of individuals who have COVID develop some mental side effects, some cognitive dysfunction, either headaches, migraines, anxiety, what we're calling brain fog, which is difficulty focusing. The key point is to be aware that there is this relationship. If somebody has had COVID and they notice any of these issues with their brain health, to report it right away to a physician. Don't think, oh, this is just, I'm just imagining it. It can be very real. We're also realizing, and we're trying to understand why this is. At this point, we don't believe the virus directly attacks the brain. What we believe is the virus might cause some inflammation, secondary inflammation in the brain. It might disrupt the amount of oxygen that goes to the brain. It also just might be the stress of the experience could be causing some impacts on brain health. But really what we're learning is, we want to report it to our physician. We want to get in and have a conversation about it and see what we can do, but also realizing that all the things that we are talking about in terms of optimizing our brain health, prioritizing our sleep, managing our stress, thinking about what we're eating, thinking about getting some exercise, all of those pieces of the puzzle when we're getting over any virus, any illness, any rehabilitation become critically important. The health of our brain, as I mentioned before, is not just one thing. It's these multiple factors that we want to combine. It's like compounding interest. We want to put them together so we can really take care of our brain. And that is important after getting over any illness, including COVID.
We are speaking with Dr. Mark Milstein, where we're going to go from COVID to mindfulness. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching The Room.
Introducing Genie Talk, the latest offering from Geniecast, the #1 virtual event and experience company. With Genie Talk, you can connect with an expert on any subject, anywhere, at any time. It's a one-to-one conversation in a private video call on our safe and secure platform. It's not a presentation. It's not a speech. It's an engaging, informative conversation with an expert. Whether it's a C-suite, business author, or prominent speaker, they are on Genie Talk. Just search for what you're interested in, from leadership to marketing, to motivation, to diversity and inclusion, and more. Find one of our many experts on that topic. Then set up a time to meet virtually. We'll connect your calendars to find a convenient time. Next, we'll send a link, and then the virtual call happens. Payment is simple and easy through our easy-to-use platform. It's the ultimate fast, frictionless way to speak to an expert about anything, anywhere, anytime. That's Genie Talk.
We are back with Dr. Mark Milstein. We were talking about COVID before the break and brain fog, but we want to shift now to mindfulness. So for those who may not know, what is mindfulness and why is it important in the work that you do?
Well, mindfulness is something that has moved from a new age mystical idea that a lot of people like me in mainstream science rolled our eyes at and said, oh, that's not real science. And then we saw the brain scans. We saw that we're searching for something that can help us manage our stress, especially in times like these where there's just so many areas of our lives that can be very stressful. And what we see is that mindfulness, this really old practice, which is at its essence, is putting the brain in the present moment and having a positive attitude towards the present moment. We see very clearly that this practice allows cortisol or stress hormone levels to drop and also fundamentally changes the structure of the brain so it's better able to manage stress. What we're seeing is that there's nothing wrong with stress. Actually, a moment of stress, a burst of stress, a challenge you want to tackle, it's actually really good for your brain. It's when the stress doesn't end, when it's too much too often. That same cortisol, which in a burst is very good, becomes overwhelming, it becomes debilitating, and actually can shrink our brain down and do damage. So mindfulness has now been really seen in multiple studies as something that can bring cortisol levels down, and it can change our brain to turn off our stress response, to take a break from it. And so it's really become a very powerful insight, a very powerful technique, something that's can be very simple to do, very actionable. And again, we're looking for something that works. We have the brain scans to show that it changes the brain. So it's become very much embraced by mainstream science and mainstream medicine.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're talking about stress, and that kind of leads me in my brain to burnout. So what is real burnout, and how do you combat that?
So burnout, which is very common, understandably now, is even if you love what you do, even if you enjoy it, it's this feeling like I just can't do it anymore. I don't have the same fire. I don't have the same passion. I don't wake up every morning wanting to do what I used to love to do anymore. And part of what's happening is stress that is too much too often. Our brain can only take so much, and it becomes overwhelmed. It actually becomes saturated. We actually see this very clearly in some brain scans, that when people are burned out, it's kind of like, I like to say, when you go to the DMV and the line gets really, 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 really long and it's just not moving. That's kind of what's happening in the brain. Information is just piled up. It's not moving through our brain anymore. And that saturation, that overwhelm causes that feeling of being burned out. Thankfully, we're really seeing some insights and some actionable things that we can do to lessen burnout, thinking about multiple facets of our wellness, of how we interact with others, how we set up our teams, how we have momentary aspects of our day that can really be helpful. Everything from taking little naps and how to take effective naps, to little stress, things that can bring our stress down, to how we communicate, how we listen. All these things play a role. And what we're seeing is that these little things do have a big impact. We see very clearly, we see in studies where we've looked at physicians who have one of the highest rates of burnout. If we enact these things in their life, in their week, we can bring that rate of burnout down significantly. And we're seeing that in corporate America too, and small businesses and big businesses.
Yeah, I appreciate you talked about corporate America, because that's where my brain, no pun intended again, was going in talking about your work with external and internal teams. So when we talk about the corporate environment, or even a business environment for that matter, how can the process or the being of empathy make a positive impact?
Oh, that's such a great point. So that's another area where we're seeing some real insights in terms of brain scans. And we're seeing that one of the most powerful things that we have with human to human interaction is giving people the feeling like we're listening and we hear them. And if we really think about it, a lot of our anger, a lot of our frustration, from big serious things to little things like someone's in line at the grocery store with too many items in the fast lane, all these things are that somebody is either violating our expectation, meaning that they're doing things that we don't think are right, or they're not listening to what we have to say. We're not being heard. We're angry, we're upset, and nobody's hearing us, nobody's listening to us. And what we're seeing is that we don't have to solve every problem. We don't have to have the answer to everything. But if we give people the sense that they're being heard, that they're being listened to, stress levels go down. We also see that really at its essence is empathy. It builds trust. We have these insights into this, what we call this mirror system in our brain, that if I feel like you're with me and you have eye contact and you are essentially mirroring my expressions, that you understand me, my stress levels go down. And just on a really simple level, if you've ever had that experience where you're talking to somebody and they're like, yeah, no, I got it. They're on their phone and they're like, no, I'm listening. And you just get angry. Well, that's that disconnect between that mirror system. We want eye contact. We crave it. We need it as human beings. And in a world where it's so easy to not have that, we can be so distracted. We don't take these extra moments. So in corporate America, having some listening sessions, some time to really have people express their feelings, feel like they're being heard, being listened to. And there's really ways to make that more effective, can really have a strong impact on the productivity and the happiness and the retention of workers by doing these little things that really make their brain feel like it's being taken care of. And it can be very helpful.
So where I went when you were sharing that is this whole tendency that I've seen in certain work environments where there's this vague and unrealistic positivity. That's really unhealthy, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we're told be positive. Think positive. We hang the mantras on our wall. We wear T-shirts that say these things. But the data actually suggests that if we're too positive all the time, we're actually setting ourselves up for unhappiness. Instead, it's being realistic. It's being optimistic, but understanding that the days and the weeks and the months are going to have challenges. They're going to have setbacks. There's going to be wrong turns and mistakes. And our perspective on those, how we think about them, how our leaders communicate that this is where we're going. These are the steps ahead. There's going to be some wrong turns. There's going to be some missteps, but we're in this together. We're listening to you. We hear you. We want to hear what you have to say about it, and being clear and honest and forthright about that, as opposed to just this idea of, don't worry, be happy. that at the end of the day, that doesn't help as much as giving ourselves a roadmap and some guidance and some support and some ideas about where we can move together and how we can get through all these unknowns and all these changes and get through it as best as possible.
When you talk about guidance and support, which you just mentioned, so what sort of messaging should organizations be giving their teams?
It's a couple key things. One is the listening sessions that we talked about. Number two is clear leadership. Somebody stepping up and outlining what's going to be happening. This is what we're going to do. We might not know. We might not know where we're going to be in 2 weeks or a month because the environment around us we cannot control. But these are the steps we're going to be taking. We want to hear your input on it. But this is the 1, 2, 3 steps that we're taking ahead. And also, besides the interpersonal aspects of team building and leadership and relationships, is also letting people know that there is help here for mental health and physical health. It's okay to reach out if you need help. I gave a talk recently to a company that was hosting, I think, 1,000 other corporations. And they did a survey. And they found the number one thing that their employees were looking for was support for mental health in these times. And so offering that, saying it's okay to reach out. We're here. We have these programs. We have wellness programs. It's okay to turn your phone off at certain points of the day. It's not about working longer hours. It's about being as effective and productive as we can be. We want to work hard. We want to accomplish things as a team, but we don't want to drive ourselves into the ground. And so saying that we're going to teach you about sleep. We're going to teach you about exercise, nutrition. We're going to talk about mindfulness. We're going to have a session about this. When people feel like that information is there for them, it's available, they're being supported, it's very important. On the flip side, it's also giving people a little bit of freedom, a little bit of independence with their schedule, with their time. I always like to think of it like little kids. When a kid starts to walk, a toddler, they want to walk away, but they look back because they want support. That never leaves us for the rest of our lives. We want support, but we want a little bit of freedom. And managers finding that balance is really the key, is giving people a little bit of freedom with that support, and that we're here with these programs and they're there for you if you need them. And people are taking advantage of them, and we're seeing success when people do take advantage of them.
So based on what you just said and something you said earlier, it's okay for me to take a nap now at any time during the day. Is that right?
Make it quick, about 30 minutes or less, based upon if you want to take the nap that doesn't leave you feeling that awful groggy feeling. Is a quick tip is even set a timer, 30 minutes or less. A lot of pro athletes do this. Your sleep cycle, if you go past 30 minutes, you get into something called deep sleep, and that's that horrible groggy feeling. So naps are good. Midday is probably best because it's less likely to interfere with your sleep at night. And again, keep it short, about 30 minutes or less.
All right. Well, fantastic. When we come back from the break, we're going to do a little role playing, which I think you'll like. So more with Dr. Milstein after this. You're watching The Room. Welcome back. We're talking with brain coach and international speaker, Dr. Marc Milstein. All right. So obviously you're on the Geniecast platform, and I'm just curious, if I was your client, how would we begin a relationship, and how would you bring a lot of the concepts and ideas that you've already talked about into our working relationship?
Yeah, the first thing is I would listen. I would talk about pain points. What are the things that you're hearing? If you're not hearing, I would suggest some surveys. I've done this with many corporate clients, is that just some simple surveys about what are the things that are bothering you? What are the things that, what are the wellness issues? Is it sleep? That one usually comes right at the top of the list. Are you having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep? Is it stress? Is that the pain point? Is it work-life balance? Is that the issue? And trying to determine what are the top priorities, and then going from there about what will be the best way to give this information. Is it going to be in a meeting where we're going to do it live? Is it going to be on demand? Is it going to be something people can revisit? Because the last thing we want to do is we don't want to deliver it in a way that's not going to be absorbed in the best possible manner. So thinking about the time of the event, the length of it, and how can we really get to the pain points and make it interactive. It's really important for people to have an opportunity to ask the questions they want to ask. Either they submit them ahead of time, or they have questions that they want to have answered, and really trying to tailor it to each group is important. And I think it's critically important to find that right balance.
What's your favorite success story?
I think that when I hear back, and I've been thankful to have this, is from, HR managers saying that not only do we want you back, which is always the biggest compliment, but we've implemented the things that you've talked about, and we are seeing the differences. We're seeing more retention. We're seeing more productivity. We're seeing the changes in how people are talking to each other, how they're listening, and people are bringing it up months later. And I think that's one of the biggest compliments I can get, is that when people say, that guy that was here, when he mentioned that thing about sleep, I do that, and I can't tell you how much it's helped me, and I've passed it on to friends and family. I think that's the ultimate compliment, is when when I try to distill it down to what you can do in a moment here and a moment there. Nobody wants major changes. We just want the smallest thing that has the biggest impact. And I feel like if I can impart those things, and they're science-based, that it's a big compliment when people use them and they tell me how much they've been helpful.
Do you have one piece of advice for everybody when they're dealing with that cynical person in their life, when they're looking to make a change?
I think listening to them and trying to understand where they're coming from, that perspective. I think being empathetic and saying that sometimes we have to put ourselves in that person's shoes for a moment, and take a moment and listen to where they're coming from. Sometimes we can be a little bit quick to think we understand why that person is feeling the way they're feeling, and often giving them an opportunity to communicate about it and talk about it, and just tell them that we hear them and we understand, and what they're saying makes sense, opens the window and the door to them having a little bit more positivity, or finding what are some ways that we can have some gratitude, and talking about, what are ways that we can find, even amongst the negativity, some positive aspects. But if we just try to hit people with the think positive message as the first thing, and we don't give people an opportunity to open up and talk about where they're coming from their perspective, people oftentimes close off, and they don't want to hear another lecture. They don't want to hear they don't want to be told anything else to do. They just want to have a moment to open up.
Yeah, listening. Great advice. One of the wonderful things about Geniecast is that you can be anywhere in the world and be engaged in a conversation like we are right now. So if you'd like to book Dr. Marc Milstein on Geniecast, I invite you to do so, because he is fantastic, and dig into his work, because we could talk for about the next 3 hours. So I'd like to thank Dr. Marc Milstein for being our guest on The Room and sharing his thoughts and insights. So Dr. Milstein, what would you like to leave us with today?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. In these times, I think that taking a moment to think about what are the things we can't control, and what are the things we can control. And really trying, not saying this week or this month, but really waking up each day and having just a moment to say, okay, what can I control today? Well, I can control my sleep. For the most part, I can really prioritize it. There's little things I can do. I can prioritize what I'm eating. I can prioritize some exercise. And if we can focus on the things that we can control, how we communicate, how we deal with the problems, we might not be able to control the problems, but we can control how we deal with them and how we manage these stresses. And day to day, by developing those key habits, we do see over time, as the days pile up, we absolutely see some positive changes that take place, and a more resilient ability to tackle and move through these constant changing times without feeling overwhelmed or burned out. And if we do, we can have some tools to bounce back from those feelings as well. So I think that's really one of my big take-home messages, is what are the littlest things that have the biggest impact that can be done each day, rooted in understanding how our brain works.
Mark, great advice. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Join us next week for more insightful and inspiring thought leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and much more. I'm John Lanius. We'll see you next time on The Room.